Gives me great pleasure to introduce today Mameve Medwed, who will be talking to us about Of Men and Their Mothers, a novel. Mameve and her husband Howard are members of the Boston Athenaeum. This is Maveve's third reading at the BA, and she's also participated in a panel discussion making a case for comic fiction as part of a Boston Writers' Room event here. Mameve Medwed is the author of 4 novels, Male, Host Family, The End of an Era, and How Elizabeth Barrett Browning Saves My Life, which was selected as an honor book for the 2007 Massachusetts Book Awards. Her short stories, essays, and book reviews have appeared in Yankee, Red Book, Playgirl, the Boston Globe, Washington Post, Ascent, the Missouri Review, Confrontation, the Readerville Journal, and Newsday, among others. This is the first of 2 of our At Noon in June authors events. Roxana Robinson will be speaking here on the 24th of June about her book, new book. The Globe Corner bookstore, by the way, will be selling signed copies in the back of the room, out in the Bow Room, after the presentation today. And also, Mameve has informed me that she'd be very happy to take questions from some of you afterwards, if you have any. So without further ado, let me welcome to the podium Mameve Medwed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Can everybody hear me? Is this working fine? I'm very happy to be back in this beautiful, beautiful room. It was such a good omen when I was here with my last novel, which was How Elizabeth Barrett Browning Saved My Life. Over there is this gorgeous marble bust of EBB herself. So I felt when I was reading that she was watching over me. I'm going to read a very short piece from somewhere in the middle of the novel, and it's not going to give too much away. I just wanted to tell you one thing. My publisher made me get a website, and I got the website for Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and I had this contest on my website, and people were supposed to write in and name their objects of desire, and the best 5 entries would get a free signed copy of my novel. So I checked it, and there were 6 entries. And so it wasn't hard to eliminate just one. And this time my publishers decided I should have a contest naming the worst and best mother-in-law stories. And just a couple of weeks ago, I checked that out. And there are a million entries, just millions of them. And most of them are the worst mother-in-law stories, but there was just one that I just totally flipped over. The contest isn't closed, so all of you feel free to send in your entries, www.mamevemedwed.com. But the one I loved was a woman wrote in and said for her husband's 30th birthday, his mother sent him a beautifully wrapped package with gorgeous paper and ribbons and all kinds of stuff, and inside was a pair of cut apron strings. So I really, and this novel is very much about men and their mothers, apron strings that get cut and can't get cut, and the ties that bind and don't bind, and things like this. So what you need to know for this reading is my protagonist is Maisie Grey. She's been divorced forever from Rex Pollock, who is the heir to the Pollock chicken pot pie fortune. And though she's divorced from Rex, she can't divorce her mother-in-law because she has a 16-year-old, and this grandmother is very much in the picture. The mother-in-law has found some suspicious powder in her grandson's backpack, and so has arranged to meet Maisie at a deli in Newton to hand over the contraband and for Maisie to get it tested. So here's where we start. It's only a couple of dots after 1 when I get there. Okay, if you want to split hairs, exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds passed. I had to circle the block twice to find a space, then hop into the drugstore to get change for the meter. Mrs. Pollock is already sitting in the corner booth, barricaded by a giant pocketbook on one side and an equally humongous shopping tote on the other. She is looking at her watch. "You're late," she says. "Your watch must be fast," I answer. I slide into the booth, the dock opposite her, guilty until proven guiltier. "You're too thin," she pronounces. "Can't be too thin or too," I begin. For obvious reasons, I stop before I add the word rich, thus giving her one more nail for the "she married him for his money" coffin. I touch my unbuttoned waistband. I'm 10 pounds over my fighting wedding weight. No matter. Facts fall in the face of eye of the beholder prejudices. As you get older, she flashes me an appraising, non-flattering look. A thin face shows its age much faster than one with a little flesh under the bones. "You should know," I want to reply, mistress of turkey waddles, incubator of jowls, those absolute measures of lost youth. But I keep my mouth shut, which has always been my problem, faced with a behemoth that was my mother-in-law. She orders corned beef on a bulky roll, fries, coleslaw, and a knish. What I really want is the whitefish salad. Since, however, I'm determined not to offer Mrs. Pollock any ammunition for my putative thinness to stir rumors of eating disorders and thus unfit motherhood, I order the chopped liver on whole wheat and a cream soda. Their chopped liver isn't bad as we give them our leftover schmaltz, she informs. Chicken fat, she translates for the Episcopalian side of me, though it's much better on an onion roll. I like whole wheat. Too bad. She glances from side to side as if the elderly, deli-bellied wait people with their stained aprons and orthopedic shoes are undercover narcs. She leans forward as if there are listening devices planted in the napkin dispenser and bowl of garlicky half-sours. She reaches into her tote. She pulls out a Bloomingdale's plastic shopping bag. "Here," she whispers. I take it. I peek inside. A smaller Costco's bag encloses an even smaller sack, which holds the you-know-what, which in turn seems to be wound in layers of bubble wrap. Russian dolls within Russian dolls. "Not here," she commands. "Put it in your purse." Fortunately, I brought along my one pocketbook almost as large as hers. I stick the bag inside the bag, inside the bag, inside the bubble wrap, inside my pocketbook. "I read about all those drugs," she says, "whatever they're called, cocaine, crystal something, ecstasy, and worse. Movie stars in People magazine are always going to rehab to get off of them." Betty Ford, I remind her. She had her own problems, but she did a lot of good, unlike some other first ladies I could name. She lives her role and squiggles mustard on the corned beef. "Tommy," she sighs. I can't imagine Tommy. All I ever use is aspirin and the pills I take for my pressure and cholesterol. What could be in that bag? I don't know anything about drugs. And you assume I do? It's that girl's influence, that January, that February. September, I supply. September Silva. What kind of name is that, Silva? Portuguese. I suppose she's Catholic. Probably. She shakes her head. I introduce Tommy to these fine young ladies in Wellesley, all from very nice families. She stabs a fork into a French fry, and he falls for this good-for-nothing with shifty eyes and a ring in her nose. "It's all your fault, the way you raised him." "What's my fault? That he's a wonderful kid?" "Well, he is a very wonderful boy," she concedes. "You got lucky." Luck has nothing to do with it. It's how I brought him up. He takes after his father, that same sweetness. She purses her lips. She vacuums up the knish in one bite. "If my grandson has, well, a little problem, I'm sure it's temporary, due to bad companions and unstable life." He has a stable life. He is unconditionally loved. No grandmother has ever loved a grandson more, she nods. But I always think it's good to face the music. Dear Arnie used to say that God never gives us more in life than we can handle. For a second, her eyes hold a far-off, misty, missing Arnie's sorrow. I think of his tiny waist, his stock of cliches, his under-the-counter checks, and I miss him too. "Thank God he's not around to have to witness this," she rallies. She points a fork, its tine speared with a potato, at my pocketbook. We'll know tomorrow when you get this, the evidence, tested. Now that you've passed me the buck, I say, or hot potato. I pat my pocketbook. It's not your concern anymore. I'll take it from here. Her voice rises. Don't you dare exclude me. I have a vested interest in this child. I assume she means financial, the cell phone, the pager, the private school tuition, the college fund, the unfashionable clothes appropriate for excessively pious bar mitzvah boys or Japanese businessmen. Financial, naturally, she goes on, but he's also my closest grandchild. Tommy and I have a very special relationship. She leans forward. A very unique relationship. I want to tell her that unique is a word which stands alone grammatically. You can't qualify it. It stands alone, like me, who, with white powder in her purse, an unwanted chopped liver sandwich on her plate, and a reproachful mother-in-law sitting across from her, couldn't be less unqualifiedly, uniquely, ungrammatically alone. In case you forgot, my grandson and I formed an instant bond at birth. Forgot? I exclaim. My own child's birth? She shrugs. Wait a minute, I want to yell. I'm the mother here. If any bonding with newborns happened, it happened with me, the mother, the one and only. I push my sandwich away. The last thing I want is to revisit the scene of Tommy's birth, the first and worst, not to mention the most prophetic, in the series of times Rex let me down. Mrs. Pollock smiles. I remember the moment he was born like it was yesterday. She's got strings of corned beef between her teeth, but I'm not the kind of girlfriend who would point that out. Not to her. His first cry, those itty-bitty toes, she continues, as if I were as incidental to the miracle of birth as the hospital room's print of Cape Cod or its beige acoustical tiles. I could have sworn those little eyes were blinking right at me. Looking back 16 years ago to the obstetrical section of Mount Auburn Hospital, you'd have hardly known I was there. She had pushed herself into the labor room. Excuse me, one nurse said and was elbowed aside. Could a mere medical team and almost paterfamilias and an ice cube sucking, deep breathing prima para stop this armored tank, this Hurricane Ina that was my mother-in-law? Get her out of here, I screamed at Rex, the minute his mother left to change into the uniform designated for watching a baby exit the birth canal. Did nobody hear me? Rex, in his father-to-be green surgical scrubs, his face as leached of color as a hospital pillowcase, stood paralyzed, petrified. What was he afraid of? Blood, death, a young father's responsibility, me, the baby? No, it was his mother. He was scared of facing up to her. All he needed to say was leave, with or without the appended please. He said nothing. Torn between his wife and mother, he was forced to pick. Guess his choice. It's her grandchild, he implored. It means so much to her to be in attendance, he begged. No, I screamed. She was not going to see parts of me that I hadn't necessarily seen myself. No, I screamed again. I understand how you feel, he placated, but she's here now. We can't kick her out. Oh, yes, we can. 4 little words. Get out of here. Maisie. She wasn't in our bed when your sperm met my egg, I protested. If she's shown up at the door, would you have invited her in to watch us conceive? Don't be ridiculous. So why does she need to be here when I'm delivering? I raised myself up on one elbow. I want her gone. Maisie, honey. He held a damp cloth to my brow. I shoved it away. Sweetheart. He pulled the wrapper off a fresh lollipop. I threw it against the far wall. You're being unreasonable. You don't know what unreasonable is, I started to yell. Just then, Mrs. Pollock plowed through the swinging doors, swathed in matching mother-son surgical attire. She stood behind the doctor at my stirred feet, claiming a center aisle view of my formerly private parts. No, I shouted. But right that second, the baby's head crowned. I needed to push. I didn't have time to edit the "Come Watch Maisie Give Birth" invitation list. Everything happened fast. With a hearty cry, Tommy arrived. The doctor helped Rex to cut the umbilical cord. The nurse cleaned him up, suctioned his eyes, swaddled him, then handed Tommy to his brand new dad. I lay back, exhausted, spent, ecstatic, elated, my breasts ready for a trial run, my arms crossed in a cradle. What about the brand new mom? Give my baby to me, I demanded. My mother-in-law moved to Rex's side. Little Arnold, she crooned. His name's Thomas. Tommy, I said. She grabbed the baby out of Rex's hands. She turned her back to me. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, she sang, then segued into Brahms. Rex's hands dangled at his side, helpless, hopeless, hapless. Stricken, he looked at me. He wanted pity, sympathy. I hardened my heart. With the collusion of my husband, unwilling or not, his mother held my son, the fruit of my loins, the product of my womb, the final reward for my pain, the diploma for 6 weeks of birthing class. She held my own baby. She crooned him his first lullaby. She staked her claim even before I ever got close enough to count his tiny starfish fingers and toes. Remember how Tommy used to love it when I sang to him, she says now. Not really, I reply. She hums an off-key Itsy Bitsy Spider. A few years ago, an article appeared about delivery rooms crowded with extended families. The author highlighted the tension between the mother-to-be and the mother-in-law. One woman, kicked out of the labor room, started a grassroots campaign called Attend Your Grandchild's Birthday. The last paragraph described a popular parenting website which promoted an online discussion titled Don't Want MIL in the Delivery Room. I would have typed in my own appalling story, but the article came out 14 years too late. I sent that article to Rex. I underlined the meaningful mother-in-law parts. I attached a Post-it with a red-penciled FYI. I didn't hear back, not that I expected to. Now Mrs. Pollock jabs a finger at my plate. You've barely touched your sandwich, she complains. What a waste. Since I don't believe that leftover chopped liver will solve the starving children in India problem, I feel no guilt. Nevertheless, I'm compelled to add, these portions are so gargantuan, a third world family could dine off them for a week. Well, you've certainly made a mess of it. It's impossible to fit this sandwich in your mouth, besides being so overstuffed it's falling apart. Only because you don't know how to eat properly, you should have picked the onion roll. She slaps the menu. Dessert? I shake my head. She chooses the cheesecake. Just a taste, she orders, the teeniest bite. The waiter brings her a slab that could do double duty as a skyscraper's cornerstone. She digs in. I worry that you're such a picky eater, Tommy might take after you. Tommy has a healthy appetite, I defend. Not if he takes drugs. We don't know that yet. She shovels a brick of cheesecake into her mouth. There are support groups for eating disorders, she says. You can find them in the yellow pages. Where you can also find Weight Watchers, I counter, as well as anger management. She ignores this remark. Her eyes stay fixed on her plate. I grab a pickle. She tisks, all that garlic, bad for your breath. I eat another one and another. I empty the bowl. I blast my bad breath in a direct path toward Mrs. Pollock's disapproving sour pickle of a mouth. All that remains of the cheesecake is a scattering of crumbs. I can identify. I feel gobbled up, too, the way I always feel when I'm near her, eaten alive until what's left of me is just a spit-out residue. I don't have time for coffee, she says. I wouldn't mind a cup of decaf, I venture. Lunch is over, she states. She slams down her fork to signal the KO at the end of our boxing over Tommy bout. Some contest. Have ever two contenders been more unequally matched? She holds up a finger for the check. She pulls on her reading glasses. She studies the tally. It's easiest to divide this down the middle, she says. She whips out a Platinum American Express. Your portion comes to $17.72 with tip. Thank you. I'd be really happy to answer any questions, about absolutely anything if anybody has them. It's always my favorite part. Yes. Well, that's a really good question. I've learned that writing a novel is sort of like gathering ingredients for a recipe, and you sort of have some characters and you have a place. Usually my place is usually Cambridge, Somerville, Boston. Yeah, and I once thought, well, I was going to run out of restaurants if I kept going back to that. But they're always folding and new ones are always coming up. So I'm always waiting sort of for a kind of binding ingredient, something that will sort of spark all these disparate pieces of the puzzle and pull everything together. And one day, somebody rang my doorbell, and I answered my doorbell, and it was a rather scruffy-looking guy who was looking for my neighbors, and I said they weren't home, and he said, well, in a very threatening voice, I have something for them. And then he left, and I called up my neighbors later, and I said, this is what happened, and my neighbor said, come over and I'll show you exactly what he wants. And I went over, and they opened their freezer and pulled out this huge Ziploc bag of this kind of yellowing, funny, frozen white stuff, yellowy white stuff, and it turned out to be breast milk, and it turned out that my neighbor was a lawyer who'd taken on a pro bono case. A woman was at risk of having her child taken away by the DSS, and she decided to show that she was such a good mother. She expelled all this breast milk and left it in her lawyer's freezer, and had been there for about 6 or 7 years. And I couldn't get this bag. It was just attached to my eyeballs. It just came me, just this image of breast milk in some complete stranger's freezer for a long time was really the spark of the novel, and that's the first chapter of the novel. And then somehow things spiral. You start writing, and you get into some kind of a creative zone, and things spiral out of other things, spiral out of other things. It's quite, people very often ask me if I use an outline or if I know where I'm going, and I never do, and I'm usually just maybe 2 sentences ahead of myself, or maybe just a paragraph ahead of myself. And when I first started to write, I used to feel as if I had to analyze and intellectualize everything and figure out everything. And now I realize that there's stuff going on in one's subconscious when one's in the creative zone. And there's a reason that I might pick this or pick this color or pick this food or pick this character. And so I've learned to trust my instincts. And I'll just tell you my favorite. I always tell this probably at every reading. My favorite quote in the whole world is a quote that I have on a Post-it over my computer, and it's a quote from Doctorow, and it says, writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. So it's such a crutch. I mean, when I'm stuck, I just look at that, and it's a wonderful thing.
And what inspired you from how Elizabeth Barrett Brown is?
I wanted to write, I'm a flea market hound and an antiques lover, and I grew up going to auctions, so I wanted to write about that, about stuff, antiques, and I wanted to write about an object in dispute, and I had to come up with an object, and I came up with a chamber pot simply because it was funny, and then I had to decide, and if those of you who don't know that book, my character inherits what she thinks is a planter, and it turns out, she takes it on Antiques Roadshow, and it turns out to be a chamber pot that belonged to Elizabeth Barrett Browning and was worth quite a lot of money, and sets off all kinds of family feuds and stuff. So I wanted to write about an object in dispute. Oh, I just recognized something. About an object in dispute, and I did some research, and I kept coming back for some reason to Elizabeth Barrett Browning because I love the juxtaposition of this frail poetess with this very humble base object. And I did some research, and I found out, and I didn't know this, probably a lot of you do know this, I found out that Elizabeth Barrett Browning famously had a dog named Flush. So I thought, my God, there was a reason I picked a chamber pot. And in fact, Virginia Woolf wrote the autobiography of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's dog. It's not one of her best books. I'm sure you can get it at the Athenaeum. So that's the answer to your question.
That's a very good book. Elizabeth Barrett Saved My Life. If anyone has read it, you have to read it.
And she's not a plant. I never met her. I didn't meet her. Yes.
Would you ever consider writing a sequel to The End of an Era? Because I'm left hanging. I don't know.
That's such a good question. I very often love open endings, and The End of an Era has a very open ending. You don't know what's going to happen. And the same with my first novel, Mail, which has a kind of open ending. And people wrote me a million saying, please write a sequel, please write a sequel. But, that book is gone. It's just dead. Not dead, because blood, sweat, and tears writing it. But once I finish, it's over. And in fact, once I've finished and published a book, I can't bring myself to read it again. I could not go back to that, and I couldn't go back to that book. The characters are just gone for me, and I'm ready to start a whole new set, a whole new world. But I did do one thing in this book, which was I brought back Seamus O'Toole in this current of Men and Their Mothers, who is sort of a major character in Mail, and he's just a minor character in this book. And it was so much fun, and what was amazing, his voice was still there, even though all my characters are dead to me. His voice was very alive. His voice just came back to me lickety-split. But, it's a good question. Someday, I suppose, when I'm really stuck, maybe I'll rethink that. Yes.
Have you known anybody as charming as Mrs. Pollock?
Yeah, that's kind of the hot seat question, isn't it? I had not a great mother-in-law, and believe it or not, Mrs. Pollock is a kind of gem compared to. I realized I thought, oh well, I had a bad mother-in-law. I can write out of revenge. And I learned that one can write out of revenge in very small moments. Like if you got a horrible review, you can give, some horrible character the name of your reviewer, but just in a small, in one paragraph or something. But I learned that you can't, a major character could so easily turn into caricature. So I've given her moments of redemption. It was very difficult for me to rise above it, but I did. And my mother-in-law was difficult. She was difficult, and this is a horrible thing to say, but fortunately, she died. Before I had children, and when I was only married for 2 years. So I know. Yeah, I know. And, oh, God. Well, that's a showstopper, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
I tried really hard not to laugh through the book, even though you kept tickling me until the last 2 pages where I just literally rolled with laughter. So your writing style was just amazing because I am a mother-in-law. I have 4 sons, and I have 3 daughters-in-law. So you gave me a lot to think about. And I was trying to be serious, but the humor is wonderful.
Well, it's so funny when I write, and I gave I was here and on a panel at the Athenaeum with Tom Perrotta and Steve McCauley, and we gave a talk on humor. And in fact, I write, I'm dead serious. I'm just dead serious when I write, and I don't think anything is funny. And I'm always making this pitch for humor that I think humor is so easily dismissed as light, L-I-T-E. And I feel that, all of us who write comic novels deal with the same heavy-duty stuff as, Tolstoy and everybody else does. I mean, we deal with love and loss and death and, mothers and children and all kinds of stuff, but with, a comic twist. And it's just, somebody wrote me a note and said, congratulations, you always write what you know. And I think it's less that I write what I know than I write what interests me. And what interests me are really those small domestic, moments. I don't write about political upheaval or incest or those kinds of things, but I'm very much interested in just family life and friendships and domestic life that kind of stands in, for me anyway, for a larger world. So, but thank you. I'm glad you laugh. Even if I only cry, It's hard. I mean, it's very hard to write. It's hard. And Tolstoy said, another one of my Post-its is, easy reading takes hard writing. And all of us want those sentences to just zing along and zip along and feel liquid and breezy and everything. But I probably write every one of them, a zillion times to get them that way. Anybody else? Yes. Oh, well, the next project, every New Year's Eve, the 31st, a neighbor of mine who was my first writing teacher said she always writes on New Year's Eve something, start of a novel, and she always had her husband pay her for it because it means you'll be writing your novel and being paid for it the next year. So I always write something, and my husband gives me a quarter, So I wrote one sentence, which was about a woman who at the age of 50 takes up trapeze lessons. But, learns the trapeze. And then I was doing an event with Margot Livesey, and I don't know if she's been here. She's a wonderful writer. And she and I once did this event at the Virginia Festival for the book. And we went into this room, and it was emptying. It was a whole seminar on poets, and a huge number of people had been there. And as soon as Margot and I got there, the room just emptied out. And there was nobody there except in the front row were a pair of twins, and they looked like two Mr. Rogers. They were kind of balding with horn-rimmed glasses and a kind of cardigan and corduroy pants, and they were sitting right in the front. And Margot read to them, and then I read to them. And we were so curious. So afterwards, we asked them why they were there, and they said, well, they go to all of the things at the festival. And we asked them what they did, and they turned out to be twin pharmacists. And there's something about twin pharmacists that's just, I can't get rid of that. And so the other day I asked Margot, I said, can I have those pharmacists? And she said, okay. But then her husband said, they're twins. You could have one and Margot, you could have the other. But she was very generous. She offered me the pair. So somehow, I don't know if I can put a trapeze together with twin pharmacists, but, I haven't been too productive these days. But, yes. No, I don't always write. And in fact, I've written 5 books, and I think they're sort of equally divided between first and third person, though not 1.5. Obviously, I didn't change it in the middle. I think, I hope that my character's voice is not my voice. I hope not. Maybe sometimes it is. And when I start, maybe it is a little, but then the character becomes so completely that character that I kind of absorb her voice. So I hope so. And I think the voices, I hope, of all my books of characters have different voices. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. But, so you'll just have to read them and find out. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. It takes about 2 or 3 years to write a novel. I don't do research. Or very little. My books don't involve any research, or any kind of research I need is, Google, half an hour on Google or something like that. Or sometimes I did talk to a woman in my husband's law firm about it. There's a DSS sort of proceeding or pre-proceeding in the book, so I talked to her about that. So occasionally I will consult experts in the field, which is usually half an hour conversation. So it takes me the actual writing 2 years to 3 years, including my own editing, not editing of publishers, editors, or anything else. It takes, when I'm writing, I try to write 2 pages a day, and it seems like a small amount, but they do accumulate. And I have a hard time really getting started. There's a long time just grinding those gears. And once I reach about 50 to 100 pages and feel that the shape of a book is coming, then I can work, longer and very hard. But in the beginning, it's totally torture. I have a friend, Eleanor Lippman, who is having a hard time starting her book, and she actually took the belt to her bathrobe and tied herself to her chair. In the mornings I'll do the paper, and maybe sometimes in the evening I'll look over. Basically, I'll look over and the most egregious stuff I'll edit out. So it's not a final polish, but I will tinker a little bit. But I try to go forward. I really try to go forward. But everybody writes in a different way, and Ellie and I read for each other, and she sends me her book, her novel, chapter by chapter, and her chapters are so incredibly polished. And I give her a big, fat, messy manuscript. So I just try to go forward, and she tries to get everything just perfect, so that by the time, by the time she's finished, very little changes need to be made, where I have giant changes that I have to make. Yeah. Oh, you look. I'm sort of spotting familiar faces. Yeah, I do. Anita Shreve is here, and Anita writes longhand, right? And she always writes longhand first, and then puts it on the computer. And I have such terrible handwriting that sometimes in the middle of the night I'll wake up and write an idea on a Post-it or something, and then in the morning I can't read it. So if I wrote longhand, I'd spend all my time trying to decipher my writing, so I write on the computer, and for me, it's been a miracle. It's been great. Oh, I love it. I really like it, and in fact, I always ask for more. Sometimes I once had an ideal editor who was just, I love him, and he was on my wavelength, and he did sort of 3 of my books, even though, they said somebody else actually had done them. And he was absolutely wonderful. And then he left, and he now only, and I hope it has nothing to do with me, only edits nonfiction. And he was wonderful, and we would just go over, as if every word meant so much in the world. And my current editor, I just had to prod her and poke her even to edit. I really like, because I feel I know my own faults, and I feel that, I always go too far over the top, and I need to pull back, and I really want an editor who will say, this has to go, pull back, cut this, cut that. So I like that. Don't get enough of it. But how do you do that? Monica, I just realized I made a terrible mistake. I was supposed to repeat all the questions, right? Okay, great. Well, that scene, my mother-in-law, that was, she was completely made up, and the whole scene in the birthing room was completely invented. Oh, yeah. I know. I don't know. I don't know how you get rid of... When I originally came up with the title, my original title was Men and Their Mothers, and my publisher was very worried that it would be filed in self-help and psychology. So that's why, we put the "of" on it, and it's, so it's a novel. So it's a novel, so, I'd have to read that kind of book myself to find out how to get rid of those people in my life. So if you have a title for me, just tell me. Well, maybe I shouldn't, that's a very good point, and maybe I shouldn't be reading this section in future readings. Maybe I should read more, some of the more loving mother-son relationships. Yeah, well, that's really nice that you said that, because I also have to remind myself when I go around and just read this, that it really is about a lot of different kinds of mother-son, mother-child, grown people and their mothers, young people and their mothers' relationships. Thanks. Okay, so thank you very much. And if anybody wants a book, I'll be happy to sign, or if anybody wants to chat. Thank you.